Welcome to Called to Lead, a podcast series on pastoral leadership for today's church, presented by the Markey Center in Santa Clara University's graduate program in pastoral ministries. I'm your host, Dr. John Rinaldo. Join us and explore leadership in the Catholic Church through stories and conversations with pastors, ministers, and scholars. We connect theology with real-world ministry, highlighting how today's leaders answer God's call to build just and inclusive communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Called to Lead. I'm your host, Dr. John Rinaldo, and excited as we begin this second season of the Called to Lead podcast. We had some great guests last season, and I'm really excited about the lineup that we've got for this coming season, the next 13 or so episodes. As you're listening in, hope you had a great summer and had some time, hopefully some time off, some travel. I know my guest just got back from a short little trip to Napa Valley, but my guest today, I won't bury the lead anymore. Excited to have my guest today is Dr. Tony Alonso, who is the Aquinas Associate Professor of Theology and Culture and the inaugural Director of Catholic Studies at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, but also known as a Latin Grammy-nominated composer of sacred music. Tony, welcome to Call the Lead. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good, John. How are you? Good to be here.
Oh, it's so great to be here. It's so great to be together. We got a chance to see each other in person recently at Santa Clara University as you were there for the Actus conference. And so we were going to record then, but technology didn't allow that to happen. So here we are. You're in Georgia. I'm in Las Vegas, and we are recording away.
Happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. So, Tony, many of our listeners know you as a composer of some of the most widely sung mass settings in the English-speaking world. Others know you as a scholar of theology and culture. Tell me, how do your roles as a pastoral musician and an academic theologian feed into one another? And how do they help you understand what it means to lead in the church?
So just the simple questions to start,
You
huh?
know, I go right in, Tony. I go right in. We got short time together. Let's go.
I appreciate that. I'll try and get there quickly. So much of what I do now as a professor at Emory and in my own scholarship is a direct outgrowth of my pastoral work. Like almost every question that I have, theological question, no matter how high in the sky it goes, and sometimes it needs to go high in the sky to get at particular things, is always pointing back to some really basic question about the nature of the church's worship, how we embody relationships with one another, with God in our worship. And so I would say they're like inseparable, really. In fact, you know, yeah, the more I do scholarship, the more I get pushed back into music in a beautiful way, as a kind of distillation of what I really mean when I'm writing a long article or a book. I find myself back at the piano, trying to express whatever I'm thinking in my scholarly mindset in music. So it kind of gives that gift back to the church.
That's really awesome. I'm just thinking about some of our shared experience. At one point, we were both in LA doing ministry in LA. You were at Loyola Marymount University. I was with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and among other things. And so I just think about the time that we spent together in your seeing you in your element. Right, leading music, directing music, and liturgy is such a beautiful thing. And obviously, the liturgy, the music, is connected to the Eucharist, of course, the source and summit of our faith. You have a book that you've written called Commodified Communion. Let me repeat that: Commodified Communion. And in the book, you look at the relationship between Eucharist and our modern consumer culture. For a parish leader trying to cultivate deep discipleship, how does a consumer mindset quietly influence the way people show up to worship on Sundays? And really, how do we pastorally navigate that, especially as pastoral leaders in the church, as priests, as clergy? How do we deal with that commodification of not just communion, but church?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a beautiful kind of segue from your previous question, because so many of the questions that I'm asking in Commodified Communion, although it's a more kind of scholarly book, very much emerged from my pastoral work. Questions about how the church negotiates its relationship with culture. It's often framed as kind of an us versus them, and that can happen in both kind of more progressive spaces and more so-called conservative spaces. Nobody's immune from this kind of like the church is the solution to X in the world. And although I certainly think the church can make contributions, part of what I'm trying to do in commodified communion is help us see that we all exist in a culture. We don't exist outside of it. Even when we go and celebrate the Eucharist itself is made up of very earthy elements, right? That we take from our culture. God didn't give us, Jesus did not give us instructions to celebrate communion with grain and grape. He said bread and wine, and bread and wine demands human effort, right? Work of human hands. And so we bring the fullness of our cultures, its beauty, and sometimes its dysfunction into our worship. And we ask God with all of that to transform it into his body and blood. So for pastors discerning this question, it's really hard. I mean, rare is the leader out there, lay or ordained, who doesn't have deep questions about how we negotiate our relationship with a consumer-minded culture. Part of what I'm trying to do in the book is humble us a little bit to realize that all of us are somewhat implicated, right? Because we tend to, okay, I'll say I tend to point out consumerism, the manifestations of consumerism in worship and all the things that I don't like, right? Like, here's where consumerism is on display, all these things, and ignore all the things that I love that might also be implicated by this same thing. So I ask us to start from a posture of humility to realize that we don't exist outside of this culture. So the way we think about negotiating it has to begin from that deeper discernment and not merely a posture of scolding. As I've often said before, we can't scold our way out of these things. We actually need one another. We need discernment. And if scolding worked, then we'd be in a much better place than we are now. So starting from that posture of humility and kind of inviting us into communal discernment of how we best respond. And often that's very granular local choices rather than, grand things. But I think our worship has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, one of my ministries that I enjoy, I'm a extraordinary minister of the Eucharist at my
Mm.
parish. And one of the things that I often end up getting peeved at, so maybe I need to check my own attitude about scolding. But you see people come to communion, some with great reverence and some with like my favorite are the people who like take the Eucharist from your hand, right? In terms of that. And I'm you really at the end, I've always think about what Pope Francis said, the Eucharist is a medicine for the sick and no matter what disposition we're in, to receive the Eucharist, so I have to remember that because I can be a little judgy at times and do a little scolding on my own side. Tony, the I'm gonna go off question here a little bit, but the culture of consumers and convenience, I think, is really challenged. And I always use the example of Amazon Prime, or mobile ordering at Starbucks. Remember when we were younger, and this is not to go back to the old days, but like we had to wait a week or two or more for a package that we want. And now, we order something on Amazon. If it's not there within 24 hours, we get mad, right? Or the convenience of ordering mobily on my Starbucks app, so I don't have to talk to anybody when I walk into a Starbucks. But then I can order whatever the heck I want. I don't even know the lexicon for Starbucks, right? It's grande, mocha, two pump, blah blah blah. I don't know. I order hot chocolate, so I have no idea, what that is. But I think we have to admit that that the culture of consumerism and immediate gratification is something we have to address and think about as church, because the church is not all about immediate gratification. As a matter of fact, it's the antithesis. Would you agree with that statement, or do you have a different take on that? No.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so complicated, right? Like you point to online ordering at Starbucks as a manifestation of this. I would point to the existence of Starbucks as a manifestation of this.
There you go.
So-
Bigger picture.
Right, right. So like, Starbucks starts, I mean, you can look at, I think it's really interesting to look at histories of any of these things and how they often start very small as local, beautiful, wonderful things in communities. And then when they become behemoth, huge, corporatized things, they become something very different. Our relationship to them becomes very different than
Mhm.
how historically humans have related to like a local coffee shop
Yeah.
run and created by members of a community. So to me, like I just immediately go to all these larger questions. But like I love the Amazon Prime example because one of the examples I use in my book is, you know, papal encyclicals qualify for 2-day Amazon Prime as well. So,
Thank goodness.
but it's this kind of ironic thing, right? That we have access even to some of the most sacred texts, documents of our own traditions, Bibles, and all of this. And even those things, not just our, paper towels and whatnot, are available to us in this immediate gratification way. So another example of the way even like our desires for things related to the church, like we want kind of immediate access to things. So I do think there is something, and I appreciate what you're kind of pushing towards. Always reminds me of that beautiful Teilhard de Chardin quote, "The slow work of God." That there is something about slowing us down that I think the church has the capacity to do, and sometimes resists that. And I find that even kind of in conversations about younger people in the church, often are about captivating them and all of these things. And sometimes in a world that is so captivating and energized, slowing people down can actually be going into places of silence, adoration, prayer, can actually be the kind of counter to those things that for which we long.
Mhm. Yeah, and the phone, our phone is a culprit of distraction, of immediate gratification too. And so I think about how many schools, how many churches, a lot of folks are doing this now. Just hand in your phone or put it away, for our time together in confirmation, session or high school or whatever it may be. So the phone is a big culprit of that as well. So
And don't can I ask you a question back
yeah.
to that? Like, I found that a lot of the young people in my life, niece and nephews, like they might grumble about having the phone taken away, but I think they kind of like it. Like the freedom to, if you have made that decision for them, no, we're going to put that away. It kind of takes a burden away sometimes.
I think you're right. So I have a 15-year-old who's going through confirmation right now, and they obviously take it away during the sessions. But the more powerful experience she had this past year was they had a 1-day off-campus retreat, and they were not allowed to bring their phone at all. As a matter of fact, the parents had to hold on to it. So I had her phone the entire day. And there is something peaceful and rewarding about that because of the full connection that they
Yeah.
have to the experience. And that's why, the research is also showing that why a lot of schools are now just, no phones during the school day is because we know it distracts from academics, it distracts from healthy learning. Same is true in church. And my sense is that I don't have any data on this, Tony, but just in my qualitative conversations with some young people, my sense is that they need us adults to kind of push them. And when you're
Mhm.
right, when their phones are away, there is a freedom that they have that they feel, and they may not be able to articulate what that exactly is, but I think they appreciate it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're doing some more research and you're looking closely at the transformation of Catholic material culture, the physical things, the spaces, the objects we use, the facilities, looking at that since the Second Vatican Council. In our modern and increasingly digital world, why does the physical, tactile nature of our worship spaces still matter so much for forming community? What is it about that that's still so important for us?
Yeah, I think I always think of Psalm 34, taste and see, and I would add touch and hear the goodness of the Lord. And I think
And
so many
smell.
and smell, absolutely. Absolutely. So many of the ways that we encounter the sacred, the ways we encounter God, are through deeply earthy material things, right? Things that we care a lot about. So much of Christian history, even though it has at times been marked by suspicion of the material, is deeply material. I'll go back to the Eucharist example. The material elements of bread and wine. We don't have our tradition without that materiality. So I want to encourage people to think more deeply about the materiality of Christian practice, especially, and how it shapes, reflects, informs our convictions about God. Because I think so often, and there are some musical connections here I could make later if you want to talk to me about music as well, which is, so we put so much faith in words as leaders. Like we think if we just say the right thing the right way, if we teach the right lesson, if we give the right keynote talk, that people will finally come to understand X, Y, or Z. And I can say as a teacher and a frequent presenter that sadly, like scolding, keynotes are not going to save the world. Um, But material objects, spaces, and the way we adorn them, all of these things communicate and form, I think, so much more than any phrase, talk, homily will ever do. And so I want to encourage us to interrogate those things more, both in worship, but also in our daily life, devotional practices and other things that shape and inform our spirituality.
I think that's the tension. You named the tension well. The tension between the intellectual and the aesthetic,
Hmm.
where we need both, right? But we are such an intellectual culture as church, that we invest in education, we invest in words and books and writings, and the Summa Theologica, right? We've got all these words to describe it, but yet what you're saying is some of that's not complete without kind of understanding of the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? We got the true and the good, but what the beautiful aspect is just as essential to our worship experience. But we default to the intellectual. That's what I'm hearing you saying. Hopefully, I'm not putting words in your mouth.
Yeah, and I think I would just add on to that, say amen to that, and also say that education, all the things that we care about in our tradition, actually is incomplete without a consideration of all of those things. And I think we have, from the earliest catechetical models, right, of people being initiated into the church, and then mystagogy, reflecting back on that oil that was smothered all over you, and when you received this, and when you smelled that, this is what was happening. I mean, the best to me Christian formation comes through that material reality and then reflection on it.
Yeah, one of my other ministries is a sacristan, and when I work with altar servers and even Eucharistic ministers, I think about the movement, right? The ritual movement that happens at Mass as well as a part of that aestheticness, and why I'm a theater person also, so I grew up doing theater, and so I always think of the church is not a stage. I'm not saying that at all, but it has elements of theatrics that draw you into the worship experience. And so, one day I'm going to write an article about sacristan as the stage manager, right, for our mass, right?
Yeah.
And how important that is. But the movement, I think, is really intentional. My two of my kids are altar servers, and I'm always giving them feedback about one, what the things that they do well, but then two, like, giving some some change, slow down a little bit in the
Mhm.
procession, right? And not everything needs to be rushed, when you're bringing when you're washing the priest's hands, right? What type of
Mhm.
intentionality, as opposed to just feeling like, oh, it's just something I need to do and doing it very quickly. And those are interesting conversations, I think, to have, also the ritual movement around it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like this is not a performance, and so there's
Yeah.
nothing to learn from this, right? It's not a performance in the same way, for sure. I mean, Christian worship is directed toward God. It's not in the leaders to an audience. And also, there's so much to be learned from other performers, aesthetical expressions. And one thing that comes to mind for me is the way in a really good play, all of the people who are on the stage are so attentive to one another in a way that in a liturgy sometimes it can feel like when I'm not doing my thing, I'm off. Like the music minister who goes and sits down and ignores the homily, or the priest who ignores the responsorial psalm and is just looking down, or all of us not really like being fully attentive to one another and the ritual roles we're performing, is one thing that I think we could learn from stage performers.
Yeah, I agree. And when ritual movement doesn't go well, it's noticed and it distracts. I mean, I think when we do movement well, it's not noticed, right?
Yeah,
In terms of that, that's really interesting. So we have to talk about music. I think
of course.
we buried the lead a little bit with your Latin Grammy nomination, but you were nominated for a Latin Grammy. Your album Caminemos con Jesus was deeply inspired by your Cuban heritage, but also Pope Francis's call for accompaniment as the primary form of Christian life. How can music serve as a vehicle for authentic accompaniment, helping communities express both their deep joys and their profound griefs?
Yeah, I mean, this connects really well with the question about materiality. I've often heard it said, and perhaps you have heard the quip as well, that they don't walk out humming the homily. And no shade to my preacher friends. And the importance, honestly, of really good preaching. It's essential. I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. And also, um, you know, perhaps nowhere in my life do I experience the power of music more as a music minister over the scope of my own life than meeting with grieving families. And very rarely is the first thing they're concerned about the homily or
Mm,
anything that's really spoken in the liturgy. Music quickly surfaces as one of the most important ways to remember this person, to connect with them in a kind of a visceral way, and sing them home to God. So there is something ephemeral about music and its ability to console, to challenge, to enliven. And so when it comes to thinking about how to accompany people, it's hard to imagine really deep accompaniment happening without singing,
yeah.
without music. I think one of my friends and mentors here at Emory, Don Salyers, has often said, tell me your favorite hymn and I'll tell you your image of God. And I'm like, wow, that's a beautiful phrase. I mean, of course, you can have many favorite hymns, but I think there is some insight in there about how a hymn can communicate so much about a person's spirituality and convictions. And so, and this can't help for me but connect like cross culturally. Often, if you want to learn something about someone from another culture that's deeply different from yours, learning their songs, both the musical styles, but also what lyrics and how they might be expressing things very differently than your own, is a wonderful way of accompanying one another. And for me, then the challenge, the beautiful challenge, is not merely teaching people things, but learning from them, right? To truly walk this journey together.
Well, speaking of favorite hymns, I've told you this a long time ago, but I'll remind you, one of my favorite hymns of all times is one of yours. And Jesus Said is
Oh, thank
by
you.
far one of my most favorite songs. I can't tell you how many times I've used that on a retreat or a formation session as a tool for reflection. So if you don't know Tony's song And Jesus Said, what year did you write that? That's a little bit older, but so beautiful.
Yeah, I think I wrote that in around the early 2000s. I actually wrote it for my sister.
Oh.
She was actually in college, her first year of college, and was really struggling. As I have since found, many college students that first year is really hard. And also, you're performing this. Everything's great on the exterior because that's what's expected. Surely you're happy. You're away from your parents. And I saw the pain she was going through, and I found the text, and Jesus Said, which is actually written by a woman from New Zealand, Shirley Murray. And I loved the text because it didn't have kind of a Hallmark card greeting sentiment to it, like everything's going to be okay. It was like, I hear your disbelief. It's okay. And I'm still here. And there was something so true in that and so tender in that I wrote that as kind of a lullaby for her.
It's a beautiful song. So look it up. And Jesus Said, such a beautiful song. I grew up on the West Coast, and to a Mexican mother and a Swedish father, and a lot of my interactions with the Latino culture was certainly influenced by the Mexican influence, especially growing up in California. I was born in San Diego. Did a lot of ministry for 39 plus years in California, now doing ministry in Vegas as well as Santa Clara University. Um, but what I've discovered, as I've gotten older, as I've been introduced to people like yourself, is that obviously the Latino culture is wider than Mexican, right? And I think we all know that. One of the things I love about your album Caminemos con Jesus was the you have a very unique Latin feel to this, and it's a great album that all you need to take a look at. And so, again, you're Cuban and inspired by your Cuban experience. What would you say are some of the slight musical differences between different Latin influences, and how does that come out in albums like Caminemos con Jesus?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think there's actually dramatic differences among different Latin American cultures and their musical expressions, just like there is with food. And I mean, there are certainly like accents that are common, but when you think of like a mariachi versus a salsa band, I mean, there's not a ton in common there. In fact, a salsa band doesn't have a guitar in it, and a mariachi has like, 5 guitars.
Yeah.
So a mariachi band doesn't have a piano. A salsa band always has a piano. A salsa band has, multiple percussionists, right? Each performing very specific roles. Mariachis have no percussion. So like that alone, it's so funny that people are like, oh, this is Spanish music or Latin music. It's so different. Both beautiful, both wonderful, and different kind of ways of expressing things. But the instrumentation comes to me as the first example of how wildly different just on the bass line it is. And then I think, especially in Cuban music, how central the rhythm, the percussion is to it. I mean, in ways that honestly, until I did this recording, I didn't even realize just how much that was. I mean, I wrote the songs, I knew kind of like the basic grooves of them, but when we actually took them to deeply amazing Cuban musicians. I mean, they are locked in. Your role is this, your role is that, your role is that. And it's almost like a religion, like, straight from certain things. It's not, to outsiders, like, oh, this is cool, this is fun, and it is. But there is something really structured about it, which I didn't realize just how powerful that was until I did the recording. So
It's actually one of the first things I noticed was just how percussion heavy it can be and how beautiful it is and how it drives it, rhythm section drives it, and it's such
mhm.
a beautiful thing. And I when we met in person, I told you one of the influences of me of learning the wider variety of Latino music out there was honestly Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Mhm.
As a Puerto Rican himself, but really trying to write and influenced by a lot of Latin music, from Vivo, his animated movie Vivo is based in Cuba, to In the Heights, which has a little bit of Mexican, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban as part of it. And you get a little taste of that. It actually made me appreciate Latino music even more, I think. Thanks to him and thanks to you as well. Well, let me change the subject here a little bit. You are the inaugural director of Catholic Studies at Emory's Candler School of Theology, which is a Methodist seminary. I actually didn't know Emory was Methodist until I started researching. I'm like, oh, I just assumed it was Catholic, so my bad. But you are doing Catholic formation in a deeply ecumenical environment. What can parish leaders learn from your work about collaborating across differences and practicing that synodal style of listening with these other Christian traditions that are all coming together at Emory?
Yeah, let me just offer just a slight fraternal correction that it's Candler School of Theology.
Oh,
And I
thank
say
you.
that only because it's named for Methodist bishop and his CEO of Coca-Cola brother. So I want to make sure we get our
You
donors and founders right. But
Candler, I
yeah,
apologize.
yeah.
I love
No, no.
that.
A lot of people call it Chandler actually, so you're not alone there.
And I'm looking
Uh,
at it, there's no H in it. I think I just assumed it was CHA and I said Chandler. So, okay, Chandler.
so many people do that. Not
Awesome.
not a worry at all.
Good.
Um, but that Methodist money, that Coke money, we want to make sure they're honored in the right. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. So yes, we are a very unique situation at Candler because Atlanta, I believe, is the largest Catholic archdiocese in the United States without a Catholic university in it. And there's larger stories to tell here about the changing shape of Catholicism in the US, how so much of the infrastructure, schools, and history is in the East Coast and um, the Midwest. But as the numbers of people who identify as Catholic are declining in those regions, there's lots of infrastructure and not as much people. In the South, the Southwest, West, it's the contrary story, right? There are more people than there is infrastructure. So we need more churches here, we need more priests here, and we need more education. And so, if you're living in Boston, there's a school for you. If you're living in New York, there's a school for you. If you're living in the Midwest, there are many schools for you. Here, if you're a Catholic interested in doing advanced theological study, there isn't a school nearby. And so our school made a pretty, I think, forward-looking investment in Catholics about almost a decade ago by creating a Catholic studies program within a mainline Protestant seminary, basically. We've always had Catholics who've come to Candler, and have learned beautifully alongside others, but there's never been kind of an intentional focus. So that was the purpose of the program that I have developed alongside other wonderful colleagues. Um, I have been so grateful for my ecumenical, deep ecumenical conversations at Candler. When I came here to study, it was the first time in my life where I was the minority Catholic in kind of, churchy spaces, which was very different for me. People would come up to me and be like, the Pope, this and that. Like, they would see me and they would just know I was Catholic. And so they thought all I thought about was the Pope or something. I don't know. It was just a funny reality for the first time to be this kind of minority Christian. Um, but I've learned so much from that reality. Dominant conversations with Catholics are very different often, just
Yeah.
kind of like the things that we care about, the things we're passionate about. There's certainly overlap. But I would say over time, it's made me a better Catholic to be in deep conversation across difference, across denominations. I learned so much from my students. The majority of students I teach are not Catholic. If I teach a course on Eucharist, for example, it's often majority Episcopalians, liturgically minded Methodists, maybe a Lutheran, and a couple Catholics. And the kind of conversations, very, there's common foundations, but then there are real differences in how we understand things. And I really try to, from the get-go, cultivate conversations that are respectful, but that don't shy away from those differences in the classroom. And I feel like we all leave it. I should say, I can't speak for everyone. I try to create a situation that we all leave it with a deeper reverence for what we really care about. And that has been transformative. And I've had amazing, of course, learning in Catholic spaces as well. But this has been a kind of next level for me.
And it's bringing alive really that Vatican II ecumenical push. I think there's something beautiful about what you guys are doing at Emory that I didn't really know about until you were there, and nor the history of understanding the lack of Catholic universities in certain areas of the South. So that's really intriguing to me. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for
Yeah.
correcting my pronunciation because that stuff really no, that stuff really is important though, is make sure we say these things correctly. So Candler School of Theology at Emory. So recently you wrote an essay, well, I don't know how recently, but you wrote an essay titled Confessions of a Pastoral Musician, addressing the obstacles to achieving the Second Vatican Council's vision of full, conscious, and active participation in the liturgy. From a leadership perspective, what is the biggest roadblock we face in helping the people in the pew truly participate rather than consume or spectate?
Yeah, it's kind of providential that you bring up that particular. It's a book chapter actually, and it's a book chapter that I wrote for a book of essays in honor of Gabe Huck, who was a really foundational person in pastoral liturgy. He was the head editor at Liturgy Training Publications for 25 years, and he just died like 3 or 4 weeks ago. So
Wow.
it's kind of a
Oh,
beautiful
wow.
thing to think about. So I wrote that in honor of him, and one of the things I do in that chapter is say it's really tempting to point to all of the problems in culture as the biggest obstacle, right? This is a theme, right? Like I could scold the entertainment culture and all of these things, and I'm willing to do that. I do that with great frequency. It comes very easily to me, and probably most church leaders. What I'm trying to do is push us beyond the easy, low-hanging fruit of the culture out there, finger wagging, scolding. And so I try to instead shift the focus to myself and like, what are the obstacles in me, or what are the obstacles in those of us who minister as musicians that prevent us from truly inviting the fullness of the assembly song? And so some of the things I talk about, I know you're asking me for one, but I'll just offer a couple. One is a fear of, well, I'll put it this way: a desire to inspire people sometimes takes over the primary role of inspiring their participation. What I mean by that is if I can sing a song for someone that moves them, that's wonderful, but that is not fundamentally the call of music ministry. Instead, it's something to inspire their participation in it. And sometimes I can settle for that inspiration part and not the participation part.
Mm.
That's just okay. I'll leave it there as one example where I think we can get a misplaced. It's not bad, negative,
Yeah.
completely focused. Inspiring people is a wonderful thing,
Mhm.
but if it kind of stays at that level, then it is not the fundamental aim to which I am called as a music minister in what I write and in what I lead.
Hmm. Well, it's certainly one of the things I've noticed is the performance type song that happens within liturgy that is not conducive to the community singing, to the congregation singing. And so there's one church that will go unnamed that I used to go to on a somewhat occasional basis. And the offertory song always ended up being the way I describe it, a performance piece. And everyone
Mhm.
just listened and nobody sang because it was choral in nature. It had parts, and unless you know the part, you're not singing it. And so that's always been a challenge for me to watch that happen. What's the balance there in terms of helping, are there times that there could be a choir sung only, without the congregation, or should all music be inspired by the entire congregation participate? Tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally possible to have pieces of music within a liturgy that, you know, are choral, instrumental, praise band, whatever the case might be, more centric. It's not that that is a black and white answer. It's when that piece becomes the centerpiece of the whole liturgy. As I
Mm.
used to say when I was a kid, I used to love the communion meditation because it was my chance to like do a song for people, right? And that became my first love. And everything else became kind of like, the ancillary to this. And perhaps in that church, the offertory is the centerpiece of the liturgy.
Mm.
And it feels like the investment in all the other parts aren't as great. And what I want to encourage us is to think about how we invest our deepest and best in that which engages the full conscious and active participation of the community. And that can take many forms. And one of the things I'm constantly driving home is this is not a stylistic argument. Participation can happen through ancient chants and hymns. It can happen through contemporary folk and other kinds of music. It can happen through multicultural music. And all of those kinds of music can also be exclusionary and not engage the assembly. So it's okay to love a style, to embrace particular styles in worship, but how do these styles ultimately help this community sing its praise to the triune God?
Yeah. And that's the type of formation I think we all need, not just liturgical musicians, but I think all of us in liturgical ministry really understanding that and getting some training on that. You are a voice in U.S. Latin theology, and we use Latin, Latino, Latina, Latinx. We use a lot of different terms here, and I think for our listeners, it might be helpful to maybe define some of that a little bit, simply because I think some of the language that we use in academic and sometimes political settings is not necessarily translated
Mhm.
into the pastoral life setting. So, but Latin, I'll let you jump into that. But what unique gifts do the ritual and popular spiritual practices of Latino community bring to the wider church right now?
Yeah, I mean that linguistic thing. I teach a course in Latine theology at my institution, and I spend like the first day, like it's a J term course, and I spend the first hour of the first day going through all of these terms and their histories and why people have used them, why people choose one term over another. And one of the things I always land on is I'm not here to tell you what term to use. I want to share with you all of these histories and why particular namings have become important to people. And then I ask people to do some discernment on why they would use a particular term and not to just use it haphazardly. That said, I kind of use them haphazardly but intentionally because I think all of the phrases, words can be helpful in different contexts. Some phrases can immediately be isolating and nobody hears you past the word you use. So I try to leave space for that plurality because people have different preferences for naming, and I think we should try and respect those whenever possible. In terms of the gifts, I mean, you know, as well as anyone, John, like the statistics of just the incredible shift in U.S. Catholicism towards the Latino church in the past several decades. Um, and I think, without overgeneralizing, going back to our conversations about musical styles and all these differences and different reasons people come to this country over many, many decades. Um, I think at its best, Latino Catholicism is often like a bridge between a kind of polarized dominant US church, because they hold together very often many things that are either or in other spaces. Like, well, we're either devotional or we're full conscious and active participation. Just as one example. Well, Latino Catholics show that those things can go deeply together, right? Like not as just kind of poles, but like they're wed together as just one example. But I do think there is a passion, a vibrancy, and a faithfulness that is not something that we just need to like make space for. We need to learn from. All of us need to learn from, and I think we can learn how to be more faithful Catholics from our own cultural backgrounds. Certainly, the music is an incredible gift to the church. I am constantly learning new hymns from different parts of Latin America and beyond that have, quite honestly, different theological emphases and themes, and they make me look at my own set of hymnals and say, "Oh, wow, why are these missing from our hymnals?" So, like, it can hold up a mirror almost to our theological emphases and teach us something. But perhaps most of all, you noted earlier that that beautiful vision of Pope Francis, sustained now by Pope Leo, of accompaniment. That to me is so foundational to Latino Catholicism. That did not come from Pope Francis. I love him, but it came from people and it reflects actually where he came from, right? Roberto Goizueta, who wrote the beautiful book Caminemos con Jesus, from which I took the title of my album, talks as of accompaniment as like fundamental Christian practice. And I think the church in Latin America has given us many, many gifts for thinking about how to faithfully accompany one another in very challenging times.
I think one of the beautiful pieces I often talk about with my students as well, as we focus on the importance of ministering to the entire family, not just the children and youth,
Mhm.
is the family centricness of not all Latino communities or not all Latino families, but of many.
Right.
And that's true for many Asian Pacific Islander Catholic communities as well. And so I often turn to my students and talk about the what can we learn from the Latino community when it comes to family ministry, right? Because all the data and all the research suggests that we need to be ministering to parents, and including parents and giving them the skills to transmit the faith to their own kids and not just depend on the church to do it. Well, I think that's happening organically in some communities, and I think Latino community that's happening organically as well, which I think is a beautiful thing. Would you agree with that statement? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you're always offering the caveat that there are exceptions to these
There are
things.
always exceptions.
Yeah, yeah. But absolutely there are certain family centric nature, and by family what I think is beautiful, it's not just the immediate family, right? It's not just like the parents and the two or three kids. It's the abuelas and the tios and the tias, and it's this very like capacious, extended under it, even to non-blood relatives, is included in that vision of family in many families. And I think that is absolutely something the church could grow into.
Oh, absolutely. And so I married, my wife is Filipina. And so it's same thing. Like we had sponsors for all our wedding and we had, Guya, and Ate, and I don't even know their names. I just know if I call them Guya, I'm good, right? And
You're good,
I
yeah.
don't know if we're related or not, but it doesn't matter because we are. It's such a beautiful thing. And my poor kids who are growing up, half Filipino, quarter Mexican, and quarter white, their extended family is just all over the place, and they're always
That's
trying to piece together.
so much good food though.
Oh,
So
yes, it is. Yeah, but they're always trying to piece together. Like, how are we related to them? And I'm like, I don't know. We just are.
exactly. Embrace it.
Embrace it. One last question before we wrap up. If you could give one piece of advice to a pastor, or liturgical director, or liturgical musician who's trying to revitalize the parish's worship culture to be more inclusive, responsive, mission driven, what would that advice be?
Mm, yeah. You began and ended with hard questions.
That's my
Um,
job.
to kind of recapitulate themes that have been a part of this wonderful conversation, I do think that absent a genuine accompaniment, it's very hard to do anything, right? Like, so many of us go in with grand ideas. We do this in the classroom. Those of us who are catechists do it, though, whatever we're doing, we just think, oh, if I just give the perfect thing, that will bring people closer to God and more faithful and whatever. And if people aren't being accompanied as that first step, then it's very hard to go anywhere else. And I think, where I often land, both as someone who cares about these questions, but also as a fundamentally a liturgical theologian, is the journey to Emmaus. And I think of Jesus walking alongside the disciples. And I'm always like a surprise that he doesn't just like say, "Hey, y'all, it's me." But instead, because that's what I would do, right? But instead, he walks with them and he listens to their heartbreak. And it's a long journey and it's slow, and they share stories back and forth. And he says, "Don't you remember this? Don't you remember that?" But it's this accompanying journey that there's no way the breaking of the bread in which he is made known to them, I think, could have happened in the same way had it not been for that journey, that walk, that long walk of accompanying one another through our griefs and fears and anxieties and hopes. And so for me, all ministry in some sense has to start there for us to go anywhere else.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you for a great conversation, Tony. It's such a joy to be together. I always enjoy seeing you whenever I get to see you, whether it's at the Religious Education Congress or wherever else our paths will cross. But more importantly, thank you for your incredible ministry and the gift that you are to the church. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. It's been a pleasure to be here.
So my guest today was Dr. Tony Alonso, who's the Aquinas, I keep saying that wrong, Aquinas Associate Professor of Theology and Culture, and the inaugural Director of Catholic Studies at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, but also a Latin Grammy-nominated composer of sacred music. Such a gift to have Dr. Tony Alonso here with us today. That wraps up another episode of Called the Lead, presented by the Markey Center for Leadership and Ministry at the Graduate Program in Pastoral Ministries at Santa Clara University. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our Season 2 episodes. And get them right to your phone, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, you'll be able to find us. Thanks again for joining us. Continue blessings on your ministry, and we'll see you at the next episode of Called to Lead.